The knocking came from under the smokehouse floor. Silas Rourke stopped with one boot on the threshold and listened. Wind pressed through the dead grass around Crow's Rest Ranch, dragging dry stalks across the walls with a sound like fingernails. The main house leaned toward the eastern slope. Half the barn roof had folded in. The wheelhouse stood crooked beside the creek, its doors hanging open to the cold. But the sound beneath Silas was not wind. 3 knocks. A pause. 2 knocks. Another pause. 3 again. He knew that pattern. Freight crews used it when snow buried a wagon or when a man was trapped beneath a slide. 3, 2, 3. Alive below. Need help. Silas set down the lantern. He had bought Crow's Rest that morning for the spring behind the ridge, the only dependable winter water on this stretch of Bitterroot Pass. He had expected ruined buildings, not a distress signal beneath his feet. He crouched and pressed his palm to the floorboards. The knocking did not come again. "Can you hear me?" he called. For several seconds, nothing answered. Then one weak strike sounded beneath his hand. Silas's jaw tightened. He returned inside, drew his revolver, and used the barrel to push aside a stack of empty salt crates. Beneath them lay an iron ring set flush into the floor. The trapdoor had been covered with a fitted plank and weighted from above. Silas holstered the gun and pulled. The plank rose an inch before a chain caught beneath it. Using a pry bar from the wheelhouse, he strained until his left hand cramped around the cold iron. He shifted the leverage to his right shoulder and forced one rusted link apart. A smell rose from the opening. Damp soil, old smoke, unwashed wool, and the sour edge of fear. Silas lowered the lantern. Narrow steps descended into a room dug beneath the stone foundation. Shelves lined one wall, most of them empty. A bedroll lay in the far corner. Beside it sat a tin cup, a wooden bucket, and a woman with both arms wrapped around her knees. An iron cuff closed around her left ankle. The chain ran from the cuff to a staple hammered into a floor beam. She lifted one hand against the light. "Stay back." Her voice was raw, but the command in it was clear. Silas remained on the steps. "I will." She stared up at him through tangled brown hair. Her face was hollow from hunger, though not frail. Even seated, he could see the breadth of her shoulders and the heavy strength in her wrists. Bruises darkened one side of her jaw. A split ran through her lower lip. Her eyes moved from his beard to the revolver at his hip, then to the open trap door above him. "Where is Boone?" "I don't know any Boone." Her expression did not change. "Who sent you?" "No one." "That is not an answer. My name is Silas Rourke. I bought this place at the tax sale." The words struck her harder than he expected. She looked toward the ceiling as if she could see through it to the abandoned buildings above. "Bought it? This morning. From Kells? From the county." For the first time, uncertainty broke through the fear in her face. Silas lowered himself to sit on the 3rd step, leaving the rest of the distance between them untouched. "I heard your signal," he said. Her gaze sharpened. "You knew it? I used to run army freight." Something shifted in her expression. Not trust. Recognition, perhaps. A fact she could test against what she saw. He removed his revolver slowly and placed it on the step behind him. "I need to look at that cuff if I'm going to get it off." "Not yet." "All right." Silas took the lantern from its hook and set it lower so the light would not strike her eyes directly. "Is there a key?" "Boone keeps it." "Where?" "On him." "How long since he was here?" She looked at the water bucket beside her. "Yesterday afternoon. Maybe longer." "Did he say when he'd return?" he said when Mr. Greeley arrived. The name meant something. Silas had seen Amos Greeley's advertisements nailed outside post offices from Helena to Walla Walla, respectable marriages arranged, contracts witnessed, transportation secured. Greeley smiled in the printed portrait, like a preacher who had never missed a meal. Silas looked at the chain. "May I come closer?" The woman's fingers tightened around her skirt. It had once been blue wool, but smoke and dirt had turned it nearly gray. Silas waited. At last, she extended her leg by a few inches. "You stop if I say stop. I stop. You don't touch me anywhere else. I won't. And the trap door stays open." Silas glanced toward the pale square above them. "It stays open." He climbed down one step at a time, making enough noise that she would always know where he was. He took a short steel punch and a small hammer from his coat. Then he removed one glove and laid it between the iron and her ankle. "This will jar the bone." "I know what a rivet feels like." He looked at her hands again. Splinters were buried beneath 2 nails. A crescent of black grease marked the side of her thumb. "You work wheels?" Her eyes flicked to his. "I did." Silas set the punch. "Ready?" "No." He waited. She drew a breath, then another, her attention fixed on the open doorway above. "Now." The first blow rang through the cellar. Her whole body locked, but she did not pull away. Silas checked the angle. "Again?" She nodded. The second strike bent the head of the rivet. The third cracked it. On the fourth, the pin dropped into the dirt. Silas opened the cuff. The woman stared at the iron as if it might close by itself. He moved back immediately. "You're free of it." She did not answer. "I'm going upstairs," he said. "I'll wait outside the smokehouse. You can come up when you're ready." Her gaze snapped to him. "You're leaving me here? The door is open. What if I can't climb? Then you call, and I come back down." She studied him with open suspicion. "Why?" Silas had no graceful answer. "Because you said not to touch you." For several heartbeats, neither of them moved. Then he climbed the stairs. A scrape sounded inside. Then another. When the woman appeared, she was crawling. Silas forced himself not to move. She pulled herself across the threshold, one hand gripping the doorframe, the other dragging her injured leg. Cold air struck her face. She closed her eyes. A cup of water and half a biscuit waited beside the doorway. She reached for the cup. Her hand shook so badly that water spilled over her fingers. She drank too quickly, coughed, and pressed a fist to her mouth. Silas turned halfway. Small sips. "I know how to drink." "Then do it slower." Her glare had life in it. He took that as a good sign. Silas looked toward the house. It was colder inside than out, and he did not trust the chimney. His own cabin stood less than 3 miles upslope. The trail was steep but clear. "I have a place above the pass," he said. "Food, a stove, a room with a door that locks from the inside." Her body went still at the word locks. "Or," he added, "you can stay here while I fetch Nell Corbett from the lower post. She is a widow, runs the store. I believe she's decent." The woman looked across the ruined ranch. Her gaze settled on the wheelhouse. "Did you go in there?" "Only long enough to get the pry bar." "Was the freight wagon still inside?" "There's a wagon frame, rear axle off, left wheel split." She closed her eyes briefly. Silas understood that the answer mattered, though he did not yet know why. "What is your name?" he asked. Her attention returned to him. "Miriam Vale." "Miriam, he said. "Can you ride?" "Not alone. I can make a sling seat behind the saddle. You won't have to put weight on the ankle. And if I refuse, I bring supplies here and ride for Mrs. Corbett. You would leave, if that's what you choose." She looked down at the broken iron cuff still hanging from her ankle by its leather lining. "Boone will come back. Then staying here is the worst of the choices." "Yes, but still yours." Miriam watched him for so long that the light began to fade from the grass between them. Finally, she held out one hand. "Help me stand. Where can I touch you?" "My forearm, not my waist." He took her below the elbow and helped her rise. She swayed but remained on her feet. He built the sling from a folded canvas tarp and 2 pack straps. Miriam inspected every knot before allowing him to lift her. When he asked permission, she gave it through clenched teeth. He settled her behind the saddle, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and placed the reins in her hands while he adjusted the straps. Silas led Morrow away from Crow's Rest, as dusk gathered along the ridge. They had gone less than a quarter mile when Miriam spoke. "The wagon in the wheelhouse." Silas looked back. "What about it? If the rear axle is still there, Boone hasn't found what he wants." "What does he want?" Her face disappeared partly beneath the blanket as the wind turned. "Proof." "Of what?" "That Amos Greeley does not arrange marriages." "What does he arrange?" Miriam's answer came quietly. "Ownership." Silas did not ask anything else until they reached his cabin. He lit the stove, then showed her a small rear room from the doorway. 1 bed, 1 washstand, 1 window, and no second entrance. He placed a brass key on the floorboards between them. "The lock is on your side," he said. "I won't come in unless you ask." Miriam stared at the key. Silas set a basin of warm water, clean cloth, bread, and broth inside the room. Then he backed away. "You should clean the ankle tonight," he said. "Mrs. Corbett can look at it tomorrow. Will you be here?" "In the front room." "Armed?" "Yes." "Against me?" "No." "Against Boone, if he finds the trail." Her fingers closed around the key. Silas stepped into the hall and pulled the door almost shut, leaving the final inch for her. Miriam closed it herself. The lock turned. Silas stood on the other side and listened to the bolt slide into place. It was the first sound of a locked door he had ever heard that felt like freedom. At dawn, Silas found the bowl of broth empty outside the rear room. He did not knock. He fed the stove, set coffee to boil, and carried water from the spring. By the time he returned, the rear door stood open 3 inches. Miriam sat on the bed with her injured foot resting on a folded blanket. She had washed the dirt from her face and braided her hair over one shoulder. The broken iron cuff lay beside her like something dead. "You said Mrs. Corbett knows medicine." "She does." "Bring her." Silas nodded. Her gaze shifted to the rifle above the front door. "You're leaving that." "I have another." "Loaded?" 5 rounds, empty chamber beneath the hammer. She studied him. "You trust me with a rifle?" "I trust you to decide whether you need one." Nell Corbett returned with him before noon in a narrow mule cart, wrapped in 3 shawls and complaining about every rut. She was a square-built woman, with iron-gray hair and the steady eyes of someone who had delivered babies during blizzards and buried men who believed weather respected schedules. She stopped when she saw Miriam. "You're the woman from Pike's stage." Miriam's face closed. Silas looked between them. "You've seen her?" 6 weeks ago. Owen Pike came through after dark with 1 passenger and no entry in his waybill. He said she had fallen sick and been collected by relatives. "I have no relatives in Montana." Miriam said. Nell set down her medical bag. I did not believe him. But you let him leave. Nell did not defend herself. Yes. Anger straightened Miriam's back. Then look at the ankle, she said. Afterward, tell me everything you saw. Nell cleaned the wound while Miriam gripped the mattress. The skin was torn in a ring, but the bone was sound, and no red streaks climbed the leg. Nell applied salve, wrapped the ankle, and ordered a week without weight on it. Miriam gave a humorless laugh. I have never been able to afford a week. You have one now, Silas said. On whose account? No account. Everything has an account. Nell's hands stopped over the bandage. Miriam noticed. You know Greeley's books. I have seen his invoices, Nell said. You have seen one side of them. Silas remained by the wall, leaving Miriam the center of the room. Amos Greeley advertises marriages, she said. What he sells is debt. A woman pays him to find a husband. The man pays for transportation and a witnessed agreement. Greeley charges both for the same ticket, meals, trunk, and witness. If the match fails, he sells the debt to an employer. If it succeeds, he keeps a lien on the woman's labor. Nell's mouth tightened. He does it to men, too. Immigrants, injured minors, boys discharged from orphan trains. Anyone whose signature can be made to look voluntary. And Vale Works? Silas asked. My uncle and I built freight wagons in Deer Lodge. He dealt with customers. I designed braces, priced timber, kept the ledgers, and trained the crews. When he died, Greeley produced a note claiming the shop owed him more than it was worth. Forged? Nell asked. My uncle signed one loan. Greeley added 2 pages afterward. Miriam pressed her fingers into the blanket. I found Greeley's duplicate ledger in Helena. Names, fees, routes, buyers. I copied enough to show the pattern. I also recovered the original partnership contract, proving half of Vale Works belonged to me before my uncle died. Silas thought of the wagon inside the crooked wheelhouse. You hid both in the axle. In the hollow rear spindle, wrapped in oiled canvas. Boone caught me before I reached the marshal. Owen Pike drove me south under a false name and left me at Crow's Rest. Why keep you alive? Greeley still needs my signature on the final transfer. Without it, he owns the shop on paper thin enough to burn. Nell rose and paced once to the stove. Deputy Marshal Elias Ward came through my post last month, she said. He was asking about missing women. Can you reach him? Silas asked. I can send a rider to Stevensville. Miriam shook her head. Not with only a story. Greeley has judges who dine at his table. Then give Ward names, Nell said. Dates, freight numbers. Miriam studied her. You kept the invoices? Everyone. For the first time since Silas had opened the cellar, Miriam looked at another person as if the future might hold something besides escape. Nell left before dusk, carrying a page in Miriam's compact hand. Shipment dates, false destinations, contract numbers, and the names of 3 people listed as both spouses and laborers. She promised to copy the information into her own book before sending the message onward. After the cart vanished down the trail, Silas found Miriam standing beside the table, balancing most of her weight on one foot. Nell told you not to do that. Nell is not here. She left me her opinion. She left you too many of them. Her injured leg trembled. Silas held out his forearm. After a pause, she used it to lower herself into a chair. His freight ledger lay open beside a pencil. Miriam turned it toward herself. You lose money on salt. I don't sell salt. You haul it for Corbett. You charge as if the return wagon comes back full. It usually doesn't. Then the empty miles belong in the price. Silas sat opposite her. You have been free of a cellar for 1 day, and you are already correcting my books. I have been free of your cellar for 1 day. I don't have a cellar. Then your property has improved in my estimation. It was almost a joke. For the next 4 days, the cabin settled into a careful rhythm. Silas announced himself before entering from outside. Miriam kept the key even when her door remained open. At meals, she sat where she could see both exits. At night, Silas heard her wake when the logs cracked, but he never approached her room. Her body recovered by degrees rather than miracles. The swelling receded. Color returned slowly to her cheeks. She tired after crossing the room and hated being seen resting. On the third afternoon, Silas's left hand failed while he repaired a trace chain. The pliers slipped from his fingers. Miriam looked up from the ledger. Cold injury? Avalanche. How long ago? 8 years. And you still brace the wrist wrong. It works. It drops tools. Only when people are watching. Then it is fortunate I am too rude to pretend I did not see. She asked for harness leather, 2 buckles, and his knife. From the chair, she cut a support that crossed the base of his palm without locking the fingers. When she finished, she placed it on the table rather than fastening it herself. Silas slid it on. The pressure steadied his grip. You made these before? For teamsters with crushed wrists. Thank you. Miriam lowered her gaze. It belongs on the expense side. No account, he reminded her. Her pencil stopped. That evening, she told him about the people whose names she had copied. A woman charged twice for a trunk she never owned. A laundress listed elsewhere as a wife. An injured miner whose contract had been sold 3 times. Silas did not promise justice. He had lived too long among men who made promises on behalf of the law. Instead, he asked, "What proves it?" The duplicate ledger, my partnership contract, Nell's invoices, Owen Pike's testimony, if fear can be made more expensive than silence. And your memory. Greeley will call me unstable. Boone kept me underground for that reason as much as punishment. A frightened woman is easier to discredit than a forged page. Silas looked toward the dark window. Then we retrieve the pages. Miriam's eyes sharpened. Not tonight. No. And not without a plan. No. She seemed almost disappointed that she had nothing to argue against. Then she pulled his ledger closer, turned to a clean page, and began drawing the wheelhouse from memory. Silas moved his chair beside hers. By midnight, the wagon, the hollow spindle, every door, beam, rope, and approach to Crow's Rest lay mapped between them. They were no longer deciding whether Miriam would be protected. They were deciding how they would fight together. At first light, Silas saddled Morrow while Nell secured the tool chest. Miriam came from the cabin with a cane and Silas's old coat over her dress. You are not walking farther than the wheelhouse, Nell said. Then drive me close enough to be useful. Frost silvered Crow's Rest. Silas found no fresh tracks, left Morrow behind the barn, and entered the wheelhouse first. The freight wagon stood where Miriam remembered it, its rear axle resting on blocks. Right spindle, she said. Silas loosened the retaining nut while she steadied the hub. The cold found his injured hand, but her leather brace held. When the cap turned, Miriam reached into the hollow shaft and drew out a roll of oilskin. Inside lay a ledger, a partnership contract, and 3 pages in her own hand. Hoofbeats sounded beyond the yard. Boone Kells rode through the gate with 4 armed men. Amos Greeley followed in a closed carriage, neat in a black coat. Nell gathered the papers. "No," Miriam said. "Put them back. If they see a bundle, they chase the bundle." She returned the oilskin to the spindle and pointed toward the freight hoist above the loading doors. "Cut the south guide rope halfway through. Leave the north line whole." They had mapped the system. Now they set it in motion. Nell slipped out through the rear door with the copied names. Silas took cover behind the feed shed. Miriam remained inside beside the brake lever, a shotgun within reach. Boone dismounted. "Rourke, you bought stolen property. County receipt says otherwise." Greeley stepped from the carriage. "Miriam," he called, "come out and sign what you owe. No one else needs to suffer for your confusion." Her face went pale, but her hand stayed on the brake. "You kept poor records, Amos. That is not confusion. It is evidence." One man advanced toward the loading platform. Silas fired into the dirt before his boots. The yard erupted. Two men shot at the feed shed while Boone and another rushed the wheelhouse. Miriam waited until both were beneath the suspended freight cradle. Then she released the brake. The cradle dropped. The weakened rope snapped, tilting the platform hard. Iron fittings spilled across the yard. Boone threw himself clear, but his companion went down beneath hubs and chain. Silas crossed behind the barn and reached the wheelhouse as Boone forced his way inside. Boone struck Miriam across the shoulder with his revolver. Before he could turn it on her, Silas hit him from the side. They crashed into the wagon frame. Boone seized Silas's injured wrist and twisted until his fingers opened. Miriam swung a wheel chock into the back of Boone's knee. He buckled. Silas drove him through the side door and into the mud. Greeley shouted for his men to fall back. Then he lit a strip of oil-soaked cloth beneath the wheelhouse wall. "Burn it," he ordered. "Every page." His remaining men fired from the gate while dry siding caught. Silas pulled Miriam behind the stone trough. Smoke poured through the loading doors. "The spindle," he said. "I know." Nell's cart was climbing the lower road. She had the names, but not the documents that could restore Vale Works. Silas pointed toward the timber trail. "We can still get out." Miriam watched flames climb the building where her work and name had been hidden. "If I leave, Greeley will say the papers never existed. You may not come back out." That was true the first time you opened the floor. The old urge to choose for her rose in Silas. He swallowed it. "What do you need?" "The north hoist line. Your right shoulder. 3 minutes." They entered through the rear. Smoke blackened the room above waist height. Miriam crawled to the axle, while Silas looped the surviving line around a roof post. She had the spindle cap halfway loose when Greeley appeared through the front doors, a handkerchief over his mouth and a pistol in his hand. "Move away from my property." Miriam stood. "You never owned it. I own every signature that says I do. You own copies." Greeley aimed at her. Silas stepped from the smoke, but Boone caught him from behind. A burning crossbeam broke loose and crashed across Silas's back, pinning him. Greeley smiled at Miriam. "Sign, and I may let him burn quickly." He drew the transfer from his coat. Miriam looked at the brake wheel above his shoulder. "Give me the paper." She reached with her left hand. With her right, she pulled the release pin. The freight cradle outside dropped. The north line snapped taut through the pulley, whipping the hook across the room. It struck Greeley's wrist. His pistol vanished into the smoke. Miriam looped the hoist rope through the wagon brace and hauled. The pulley groaned. The fallen beam lifted an inch. "Roll!" Silas dragged himself free as the roof began to crack. Boone lunged through the smoke. Silas met him with the brass brake handle and drove him down. Miriam tore the oilskin from the spindle and shoved it beneath her coat. They dragged Boone through the rear door, because leaving him to burn would make them executioners instead of witnesses. Greeley stumbled after them, clutching his wrist. The wheelhouse collapsed as they reached the trough. A rifle clicked from the road. Deputy Marshal Elias Ward sat on a gray horse beside Nell's cart. 2 deputies flanked him. Behind them stood Owen Pike, pale and hatless. Ward looked from the fire to Boone and Greeley. "Mrs. Corbett's message named 6 missing people," he said. "Pike named the place he delivered Miss Vale." Owen could not meet Miriam's eyes. "I told myself she had signed." "You left me chained," she said. "Yes." No apology altered that fact. Ward put him under guard with the others. The ledger survived. Nell's invoices matched its numbers, and Owen's testimony tied Greeley to Crow's Rest. A territorial judge froze Greeley's accounts, voided the false contracts, and restored Miriam's legal ownership of Vale Works. The shop itself had been stripped. Miriam sold the town property, paid the workers Greeley had dismissed, and returned to Bitterroot Pass with tools, timber, and a new sign. Silas had repaired the wheelhouse roof but left the smokehouse floor open. Together, they rebuilt the cellar steps wide enough for 2 people. Miriam fitted the new door with a latch on both sides and cut a window through the foundation so morning light reached the lowest shelf. They made the room a winter pantry for travelers stranded by snow. By spring, freight wagons stopped at Crow's Rest for repairs, water, and contracts written in plain language. Nell kept copies at the lower post. Silas guided loads through the pass. Miriam ran the shop and refused every invoice that hid one fee behind another. One evening, Silas stood beneath the new sign while she checked its iron brackets. Vale and Rourke Pass Works. "You can still put only your name on it," he said. "I know. And you can leave whenever you choose. I know that too." He looked toward the smokehouse window, glowing in the last light. "Then why stay?" Miriam climbed down and placed the key to her cabin room in his palm. "Not as surrender, as a gift. Because this is the first place I have lived where every door opens from my side." Silas closed his fingers around the key, then waited. Miriam stepped forward of her own accord and rested her forehead against his. Behind them, the spring moved beneath the thawing earth, carrying clear water through land that no longer belonged to silence.